You know, it is hard sometimes to be with who we are in the world, you know, I will have to say. And I think that's one of the things that I really got from Teresa of Avila is the, you know, you know, where we are, and no matter what our upbringing is, that there's something moving through our lives that is calling us to something. And however, whatever that looks like, it's exactly what you're supposed to go through, and it's exactly where you're supposed to be. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys today, because it helps me to formulate my thoughts and my feelings or experiences. So I have to say that I'm more of an experiential person because my memory sucks. Oh my gosh, if I want to remember something, I have to write it down. And so I've just kind of learned to accept that. And so, you know, one of the things that's really helped me through just being still is to be able to integrate things, you know, because growing up in the Church of Christ, we were all about Bible study. So there was so much information. And so I remember when I joined the Catholic Church around 2000, it's like, oh, I can finally start living my faith. I mean, I didn't have to study it like that. So so there was a benefit to, there was a benefit to everything that I went through. So, okay, so let me just pause and breathe. Because I did want to say that every time I come here, I am so moved by the music that you guys play. I mean, I'm just tearing up, and I'm like, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. You know, because I don't want to be a blubbering idiot up here. So, you know, if I cry, it is my self-expression. So it will pass, okay? So don't worry about it. So, but the words just always mean so much to me. And, you know, the open mind and the open heart, and love is present here. And, you know, I feel that, I experience that. And so I just really thank you for this, you know, your presence. And for those who I don't see, but I know you're there, thank you for being here. So when I first joined the Catholic Church and was almost immediately introduced to centering prayer, and started reading and studying more about the contemplative life, a lot of the mystic names and books were recommended. In the Interior Castle, The Cloud of Unknowing, were definitely some of those. And someone had even given me The Interior Castle by Teresa of Avila. And I looked at it, and of course I read the first couple of pages, and I'm going, whew, that went right over my head. So I put it back on the shelf. And, you know, growing up, we didn't appreciate and study saints, you know, or angels, you know. That was of them. That was their work. And so so it was, you know, a whole new world for me to just really study the saints. And so when I was in this, when we were in COVID last year, and we were in quarantine, I created the context of being on retreat. You know, that meant a lot. That was inspiring to me, instead of being quarantined, okay? So I was on retreat. And so I said, well, what would I do on retreat? Because I've been to, I wouldn't say a lot, two silent retreats. And they're very powerful. They're very powerful because you give yourself permission to go deeper. You give yourself permission to look at places in your life and be with the good, the bad, and the ugly. But it's so therapeutic. It is just very nurturing. And so I thought, okay, so how do I want to use this time? And so I had heard about this course, this online course, through the Center for Action and Contemplation. Again, another website, Father Richard Rohr leads that. And they had an online course called The Interior Castle. And so by James Finley. Now, James Finley was, he was a psychotherapist, but his background was he was very abused, came from a very abusive family. His father was an alcoholic. So as soon as he was able, he left home and went to the monastery. And because his only place of refuge was a church on the way home. So he felt that that was a safe place. So he went to Gethsemane, and his spiritual director was Thomas Merton. So he was sat with Thomas Merton for several years before he died. And and James Finley had to leave the monastery at some point because he had to deal with his past. He had to go back and deal with his family. He just couldn't run from it anymore, and then became a psychotherapist. So he was leading this course, and he immediately said, now this is not going to be a theological course on the interior castle. This is going to be an experiential course. I'm going, yes, okay, good. I can do that. So I don't know, you guys may be familiar with Teresa of Avila. I kind of knew, and so it was really interesting for him to, begin to explain her life. And it was fun because he said from the very beginning, he said, before we get into the interior castle, and for those of you who aren't aware, the interior castle was her last writings a couple years before she passed away. She had had this life of prayer and visions, transverberation, where, she had this experience of just being very intimately involved with God. Her whole thing is just union with God. And so her superior asked her to write a book, said, what is it that you do so that we can teach the younger sisters, on your path? And so this was her view of the prayer life. And it was a crystal palace with 7 dwellings, 7 rooms and the innermost dwelling is union with God. And so that's the interior castle, very a classic. And I've totally come to appreciate it over the years. So Teresa of Avila was born in Spain in 1515. She was a first-generation Catholic because it was during the Spanish Inquisition. Her father was very wealthy, so basically bought his way into the Catholic Church. But a lot of times they were ostracized because they still practiced some of their Jewish faith, and so they, it was kind of like that balancing act. And at a very young age, she was spinning around as a little dancer, and she just felt this sense of eternity. And so from that time, she's always felt like she's wanted to find, what does that mean? And so that was kind of her first experience of the divine, just that sense of eternity, like life goes on forever. So she was the 3rd child in this family, and very close to her mother. And when her mother died at 14, her father, I think a couple of years later or so, married her aunt, so her mom's sister, and they did not get along. So she became very rebellious, and at 16 there was a scandal. Now, they don't know what it was, nobody knows the details, but her father decided to send her off to a convent. She said, okay, let me just kind of put her away for a while. maybe she'll straighten up. So at first she really rebelled and, didn't like it, but by the time she left there, she, after a year, she came home, and she really sensed that she missed it. Well, especially when her father said, you need to get married. That's what young girls do. And she was not interested in getting married. And she really wanted to go to this Carmelite monastery that was in Avila. So that's where they lived. And he said, no. He said, no, you need to stay home. Well, she got very sick. And so sick that she was at the point of death. And at one point, she even fell into a coma, and they thought she was dead. They actually had her body presenting to be buried with the, patches over the eye, in the house, and her father's sitting there holding her hand, and then all of a sudden he feels movement. Oh, you're not dead, okay. So, but she was very sick. It took her a whole year to learn to walk again, and she suffered a lot of pain and a lot of illnesses throughout her whole life. So that was definitely part of her journey. So she finally joined the Carmelites and loved it, and went on to have very mystical experiences. Her whole desire is that she wanted to see God now. She did not want to wait. So it was her intention. And so she did. She had a lot of mystical experiences and locution. So sometimes she was one of those that they'd have to hold down. You know, she'd start rising. They'd have to hold her down, which I think is so funny. It's kind of, so then all of a sudden everything kind of dried up. You know, she went from like all up to everything to nothing for many years. And I think she was around the age of 40. She was just devastated. She said, you know, it was very frustrating for her. So there was an experience where she was walking down the aisle, what do you call it, the corridor, you know, in the monastery, and there was a statue of Jesus that had kind of gotten skewed, you know. So she was going up to straighten it and caught the eye of Jesus in this statue, and it just came alive for her. And she actually fell prostrate. She said she was so overwhelmed by that she said, I am not leaving here until you promise me that you'll never leave me again. And he never did. I mean, at that point, it was just a new relationship, you know. So, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the significance of 40. And so, so let me get my thoughts here a minute. I'm kind of jumping around, but I want to give you kind of the overview of her life, because what James Finley said, he said, I want you to get a context of her life and the thread so that then you can understand where she's coming from. And so, and, you know, at the end of that, he said, I want you to take a look at your context and thread that's calling you. You know, what is it that has formed you and moved you to where you are today? You know, why are you being called to what you're being called to? And it was such an acknowledgement. It was such a neat experience, you know, to kind of go back and to look at our background and look at our family unit and to see how that has made a difference in our lives today. So there wasn't much more. Oh, the other really significant thing about Teresa was, so during all of her visions, so the Inquisition came and interviewed her. So they said, okay, we got to find out what's going on. So they started questioning all of her visions, all of the details about everything, wrote it down, just to find out, is this of the devil? Is she mentally ill? Or is it the truth? And so that actually became her autobiography. That actually became her book, The Life of My Life. It's called My Life. So, and it was everything that she recorded to these men. And they also said she was tall, very gregarious, very friendly. So befriended all these men that were questioning her, and they became her disciples. Yeah, so she just had this way about her. And another really significant person in her life was St. John of the Cross. So she was really committed. So let me just back up a little bit. So Teresa of Avila was very committed to the contemplative life. She realized that it was in that stillness that God meets us. It's in that listening and that waiting that God speaks to us. So she really wanted to teach people that. And, you know, one of her famous quotes is, the closer one approaches to God, the simpler one becomes. And so she really wanted to transform the Carmelite monasteries, because they had become very busy, very action-oriented, you know, and not really, you know, having the priority of silence and prayer. So she went about reforming and ended up reforming 20 monasteries in Spain. But she had a lot of help from this younger friar, John of the Cross, later became John of the Cross. So, and at one point he was captured by his own men, the men in the Carmelites, because they, you know, there was division. No, we don't want to go that direction. So they actually put him in a cell, which was kind of a tower. It was just a circle. He couldn't even stretch out for over a year. And they abused him. I mean, they beat him, they hardly fed him. And we're like, seriously, did this really? He was like, no, I don't want to hear this, you know. But during that time, he wrote The Dark Night of the Soul. So those of you in the contemplative world, that's where that came from. You know, that he experienced that darkness and depression. And he finally, and a lot of his poems came from because one of the guards passed him paper and pencil. So he was actually able to write a lot of this down. So, so Teresa befriended him and said, let's do this together. So they went about reforming the Carmelites. And at one point, he was, so she was kind of like his spiritual director, and at one point, he was so attached to her, he felt, that he just had to let her go. He used to carry her letters around in a pouch on his neck. And at one point, he took off the pouch and threw them into a fire. So we have no record of those letters. However, we do have record of the letters, you know, from John to Teresa. So they became very close friends and just really connected in that reformation of the Carmelite monasteries. So as she was getting older, she died at 67, and like I said, her superior had asked her to write this book, and she was so involved. She was an administrator and very busy. She said, I can't do this. You've got to do this for me. So she was really led by the Spirit to write the interior castle, one draft within 6 months. So, you know, that was, you know, how the interior castle came about. So the books, the interior castle, The Way of Perfection is her other book, and then My Life. So those are her 3 books. But the interior castle and The Way of Perfection are kind of the practical blueprints for seekers who want to really experience prayer as mystical union with God. So that's a little bit about Teresa of Avila. And, you know, I have a whole new appreciation. So now I really want to go back and study. And, you know, I'm the chapter coordinator for Contemplative Outreach of Richmond. And so this year in September, we were talking about, well, what do we want to do this year? Well, it just so happened all of us were studying a different mystic or different, you know. So each month we have highlighted, you know, a different mystic. So mine is in February. So yay, you guys are helping me prepare for that. You did that. All right, killing 2 birds with 1 stone is like, I love it. But you know, anybody can get information off the website. I mean, there's a lot of information about that. So, you know, I don't want to share, you know, I don't want to get into any more about Teresa of Avila because that wasn't really, you know, my intention, you know, or this is what actually led to what I want to share with you today is about the context, the thread, and the importance of 40. Not only the age of 40, but 40 years. So, so as I looked back at the significance of context, so, you know, I had an opportunity to look back at our life in Denver. I mean, I felt so honored to be part of the Traps. That was our maiden name, Traps. And my parents came from Texas, so they were a first-generation Coloradoans and like pioneers. I just felt like they had this pioneer adventure spirit. My dad loved the outdoors, so he loved being outside anytime he could. He worked for the TV station, worked up at, he was up at the transmitter at Lookout Mountain for years. We lived right there in Lakewood. So when he came home, he was ready to be out. So we played tennis, we did volleyball, hiking, camping, we even had horses, we were part of Western Airs. So I felt so blessed, and we even had land out in Fort Lupton, and he built a tree house and then a cable down to another trees to get out. You know, grab the cable and zip down a zip line, you know, and this was back before the zip lines became really popular. So I just felt, and then surrounded by sisters and family, and we were so close in our church. So they were also, and most of them were transplants from Texas, particularly Dallas, and, you know, so we had this community in our church that was like an extended family. So we felt very much loved and supported. And so family and love and community, became one of my threads. When Judian was saying everywhere we went, that was the first thing I did, was create community, because I just saw the importance of it. So I was the middle child, had one of those peacemakers. I was the peacemaker, and oh, the golden, I'm getting there. My connection to Dad. Yeah. And even though, looking back and, looking at, there were definitely times you can say what didn't work in the conservative Protestant churches. But there was a lot that did. It gave me a container to feel safe in. It gave me a place to come from. And the other thing is that they really wanted, it was all about, back then it kind of felt like being good, but it kind of turned into like becoming the best version of myself. So, any of that can be transformed, and the sense of family and community. So coming back to my being the golden child, I definitely had a connection with my dad. My dad and I had a lot in common. Again, we were both that middle child. We were both the peacemakers. We had the same view on work and play. I mean, he loved to organize and clean, and I did too. So I remember Judy I remember our Saturday morning, we got to go clean the basement. I mean, it was a wreck by the time we all played down there, but I loved it. By the time we got down there and started organizing and cleaning, you saw the before and after. So, they know that still has stuck with me. And especially moving around in the military, you just had to have some kind of order. And both my mom and dad loved a clean house. And so we were, we grew up to appreciate a clean space. Athletics, so, I majored in physical education, so we had that in common. Again, I was the one that enjoyed working with him. We had a fence row in the land in Fort Lupton, and I was right there, and I knew exactly what tool he needed before he even asked, and the other kids are like, oh, please, no, let us go play. I don't want to work with Dad, because he could be hard, But for some reason, I could see beyond that. So, and then as I got into, before I get into college and when the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People came up, we were all on that, about being effective. And one of his regrets was that he didn't take more risks. And so I think when this book came about, he was like, I'm all about taking risk. And so there was a lot we shared. But one of the other things that really connected us was my broken bone and being cut with a chainsaw by him. So, so we were out at the farm, fell back on my arms, and on my hand, broke my arm. And so, of course, you get all that kind of attention. And I think I was the first one that had a cast. And so, and then as a junior in high school, I was helping him clear out the wood, and I was holding a wood, and he was coming through with a chainsaw, and it hit a knot and came through and hit my leg. So it cut the left side of my leg. I mean, a fraction of an inch, just right on the other side of the bone. Didn't hit any bones, just hit that muscle. And, of course, he was devastated. And, but I was so committed not to make it worse than it was. So that was one of those times when thoughts really, it's like, I'm going to really work hard, working through the pain, so again, one of my threads is lean into the pain. And and then, as we got older, it was more of that 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and all that. So it's kind of fun to see some of those threads that, that I still feel were part of my dad, part of my older sister, who passed away in 2015. My dad in 95 from meningitis here in Grand Junction, very suddenly. But I felt so appreciative of what they did and their commitment and, where they were coming from, that they had their context or their, life to experience life through. And then also being of service. I think, that's where my idea of service came from, because they were always ready to do for others. I'll never forget getting a phone call in the middle of the night of some homeless guy, somebody asking for money. And my dad got out and met him, and I don't think anybody was there. I don't think anybody, but he did it. I mean, he was actually willing to go out in the middle of the night and give somebody money, you know, to help them out. And I saw that all over anytime someone needed help. So it was a great example. So the other thing is the significance of 40. So if you think about you at 40, something significant might have happened. Now, my dad died when I was 40, you know, and I never even realized that until he mentioned that. And then the other thing is the idea of 40 in the scripture is a period of probation and trial. So Judy and I have talked a lot about you know, significance of numbers, and the year 2020, and 2020 plus 20 is 40, and I thought, wow, that just is a powerful year, is how I felt and how I was really taking it on. So again, I was taking this course, and I remember thinking back on my time in the military, and as much as I loved it, as much as I tried to make the best of it, and particularly around creating home and community, there was still something like I felt like I was wandering through the desert. I felt like I'm not there yet. There's always my permanent home. I was waiting for that permanent home where I really felt like I didn't have to go anywhere. So even though we lived up in Northern Virginia for 17 years, in one house 12, it still never felt like home. You know, we just knew that that's not where we were going to retire. I don't know if you guys have ever lived in the D.C. area. It's not where you want to stay for very long. Very interesting to visit. So, but, you know, since doing centering prayer and really having that practice of opening the open mind, open heart, you know, through the whole thing, I felt like I was coming home. And then when we had moved to Denver, we finally left in 2015, came out to Colorado because that's where I thought we wanted to settle. That's where I thought home would be. I was able to participate in the spiritual journey through the Center for Contemplative Outreach that Father Keating started, and just really understand this whole journey and how prayer just opens up your heart. I mean, to me, it's just the journey from the head to the heart, where you can be more in tune to what moves you, to be more in touch with who you are and where you are. And so it really was a feeling of coming home. And so when I woke up one morning, we were like a month from taking over a house we were building in Denver. I woke up and I said, this is not my home. I got to go back to Virginia. You know, and Richmond. I had been looking for Richmond, and I said, you know, whatever it takes. And so I immediately, and we had put down like $8,500. I thought, I don't care if I lose it. I got online, found this house in Richmond, and texted my daughter. It was President's Week, or Martin Luther King weekend in January of 2017. I said, go by and look at this house. And she goes, what? She's like, thinking that we're moving to, you know, we're staying here. And so, Mom, it's great. And she and I have been looking over 5 years trying to find a house in Richmond. But anyway, so my husband wakes up and I go, so guess what? He goes, okay. Because he said that I would have the say. He said he moved me around for 30 years. I would have the say in this one. So this was a Monday. I flew out Tuesday, looked at it Wednesday. By Friday, I was out of my contract. By Sunday, it was accepted. Got all my money back, and it is like heaven on earth. Judy and finally came. It's like a retreat center. So if anybody wants to come visit us in the woods, by a lake, and so, but in town, and like 10 minutes from my one daughter and 2 hours from my other kids. So anyway, so I had come home, you know, I was home, you know, and not only spiritually, but physically. So then I got to thinking about this 40 years, and that my 40 years started when I was, you know, a young adult. Bo and I had decided to get married, but I got pregnant. And I knew that I couldn't, this was going to devastate my parents. This was like, what, 40 years ago, plus years ago. It was going to, so I just thought, I can't, and we were going to get married like a couple months later. And so I just knew that we couldn't wait. So after I talked to my dad, not my mom. She answered the phone. I said, "Can I talk to Dad?" and, I told him, I said, "Well, we're going to get married on Guam." He was headed over to Guam. I said, "Well, we're going to get married on Guam because I'm pregnant." And so he said, "Well, Becky, we all make mistakes. Don't let this ruin the rest of your life." And then he said, "You want to talk to your mom?" I go, "No." "No, you can tell her." "Okay, well, she'll probably call you in a couple days and churn up. Why did you do this to us? How could you do this?" So anyway, so that was kind of the beginning of being sent off to get married. It was the beginning of my journey. And do you know, from that year to the year we moved to Richmond was 40 years. It's like, oh my God. If God does not have a handle in my life, in your life, you're blind. So, I just so appreciated, looking at my life through the saints, and who would have thought, that we learn so much from each other, and it's not, we're all saints. I'm serious, we are all saints. So it's not even like we have to go back to the 1500s or, even they have a lot to offer. But, every one of them was going through probably more than what we're going through, So they do have a lot to offer, and they're not easy reads. It's one of those that you just read and then you just sit with. They've just got so much wisdom. So, thank you for letting me kind of formulate my thoughts and share with you this gift that I was giving during my retreat last year. So, thank you guys.